Hello team, so welcome to episode 3 in this online performance series here at Move. I'm here with G today. Obviously we'll all know G, but in terms of G's background and in terms of what she does here at Move, G is very much like the specialist in the women's health clinic over there for us. You do the mummy MOTs, don't you? And also help our clients out with various women's health issues. So today we're going to dig into a slightly different topic, all about the menstrual cycle and how it could potentially affect performance. And G's just going to give us a little bit of an overview because it's a very broad topic this, so I think the best way for us to look at it would be to go into a few details and then we can come back at a later date with maybe some more specific questions. Happy with that? Yeah. Perfect. So, G, in terms of the menstrual cycle and performance, if you just had to give sort of a brief summary of some of the training you've done on it, some of the education, what are some of the main factors that you think some of our clients should consider?
Okay. So this is where it's difficult because not everyone has the exact same menstrual cycle. So it's not necessarily a one size fits all approach. And it's one of those things that not everyone might have the same symptoms depending on what I'm just going to tell you now. So in terms of the menstrual cycle, it's thought to have an impact on your training, like intensity and what you'll feel like during your training, depending on what stage of cycle you're in. So if you break the menstrual cycle down almost before ovulation and after ovulation, that's the best way to kind of look at it. So days 0 to 7 are when you're bleeding. That's when your uterine lining is shedding, and that's when you're on your period. That's the start of the menstruation. Then you've got about 7 days after that before you start ovulating, which is called your follicular stage. During this stage, what we'll see is our estrogen will really start to rise. It will be really low during our period, and then it will start to rise right before ovulation. Now, estrogen is said to be almost a bit of like an excitatory kind of hormone, and it will aid your performance. So often during this time, it's almost a week after your period, you'll be feeling your strongest, you'll be able to complete a lot of high intensity workouts, you'll feel really good, and you'll probably be able to smash those PBs quite a lot. Then you reach sort of day 14, ovulation stage, all the hormones start to almost flip on their head, and you go into what's called the luteal phase, which is where your body is, in essence, preparing for pregnancy. And what happens is estrogen drops and progesterone rises. Now, progesterone is said to have almost the opposite effect of estrogen, and it actually sort of inhibits all that cortical excitability. So what happens here is you might see a bit of a drop in your intensity of training in terms of you can't push as much as you were doing before, you might not be able to lift as many heavy weights, you might be having that sort of mental attitude of why can't I lift this weight? I literally lifted this 2 weeks ago, like why can't I do that? And it's one of those where people need often a lot more intake in terms of energy sources through like carbohydrates to that to sort of counteract that sort of low energy levels that you're having. So in sort of summary, week after your period, your training is often your best. After that sort of last 2 weeks, and mainly that last week before your period, you'll be feeling quite, not always, but quite low in terms of the effort levels that you can put in your training, and things just might feel a bit meh, really, to put it bluntly.
Okay, so I'm going to try and keep up with this because obviously I'm nowhere near an expert on this topic and in terms of experience as well. So I think actually that might be beneficial in terms of breaking it down into
100%.
like terms I can understand. So days 0 to 7, you're sort of looking at sort of a normal presentation for you, is that right? Or
Not necessarily. So day 0 to 7, this is when obviously you'll probably notice it in terms of Christy. We'll cut that out. This is where, so obviously day 0 to 7, when you're on your period, your hormone levels are really low. Both hormones, both estrogen and progesterone levels are really, really low, but they're stable. Okay. So often during your period, it's very different for everyone. Some people have low mood, some people have low strength, some people are just feeling hungry, tired, fatigued, and irritable. Some people might get that before the period. That's where it's a bit complex. So you'll be able to do okay in the gym. You might not be at your best, but you're probably not at your worst. Okay. You're probably just at an okay level, but depending on how bad your period gets, some people get really tired and really fatigued and a lot of pain on the period. That might influence their training levels.
And then from that stage, you go into this, basically the stage which is going to be slightly better for performance when estrogen rises, and then it dips in when that progesterone rises. It dips a little bit from a performance perspective, and then you come back around to the start, effectively. Okay. Exactly. So in terms of, I think what you hit on in terms of like the carbohydrate intake is really great to consider as well. So, because like I see it in the gym all the time. I see it with clients where we'll hit one weight in week 3 of the cycle, and then week 4 we'll go to hit a very similar weight, and it'd be a very different lift and very different from an effort perspective. And this will happen to everyone, like male or female, but obviously this is going to have a bigger impact as well, isn't it? So, in terms of the considerations from a performance perspective, can you just dig into a bit more detail, like you say, on like possible accommodations you could make based on those different phases?
Yeah. So I would say starting off from almost like your follicular stage, which is a week sort of after your period, that's where you're strongest. The main thing that you probably need to consider there is the fact that you've just gone and lost quite a lot of blood, and there's a lot of inflammation that's happened throughout that period. So in terms of nutrition afterwards, it's sort of hydration is key, and then also things that are high in iron, so like your leafy greens, like your fish, like all of that, that's really important. But in terms of like carbohydrates and things like that, just stick at your normal level in terms of calorie intake. It's just making sure that you've had enough almost in terms to replenish anything that's been lost in terms of inflammation wise or blood loss. So iron levels are really important there. Into your luteal phase where your progesterone is really high, because you're not able to accept, like the energy stores are depleted basically. So that's where you almost need to try and reimburse them through external factors, because obviously everyone's got resting levels of sort of energy stores that they have, but you just less so during the luteal phase. So more protein, more carbs are definitely important during that. Water's also important, but not like crucial. It's more so that sort of carbs and protein is going to be super important just to give you more energy than you would do. But it's not necessarily going to be like, right, okay, I need to carb load, but you just might need to focus a little bit more on making sure that you've got adequate like protein and carbs.
Yeah, and I suppose, as you said at the start, like it won't be a one-size-fits-all approach for everybody, but these are considerations that you can make if you're feeling a big dip.
Yeah.
Because actually, I'm assuming there's a spectrum to this where some people will have more of an effect than others.
100%. It's like I've spoken to some of my clients here, and they'll be like, oh gosh, it's like it's the week before my period is where I just feel so weak. And then some people have it where actually when they're on the period, they feel really weak. So it's not always a one-size-fits-all. It's very much theorized. That's what can happen. But if you're someone who has like a regular cycle, then you'll often get, and you've been training for a while. If you haven't been training for a long time, you might not be able to pick up on it as much. But if you've been training for a while, you'll know when you have those ebbs and flows. And it's not necessarily anything that you can change. You can't change what's happening in your body, but it's also just being realistic. Right, okay, I know I'm in the phase where I'm a bit low energy. I might not push for this PB today, or if I do push for it and I don't get it, you know why. It's not necessarily oh gosh, I'm not strong enough, I can't do this, I can't do that. It's your body's just not the same as it would be in different other levels of it.
I think, yeah, so that makes a lot of sense to me. And again, it's kind of like coming at this from a broader coaching perspective. I think the point you've made there is really important around you need to be trained first to start then looking at this as a major factor, I suppose, don't you? Because it's the same with all of these things. Like we can look into sleep, we can look into hydration in minute detail, granular detail, but until you've got a base of general physical preparation, it's actually going to be a very sort of, like it's just the cherry on top. You need to actually build out your base and your foundation first. And I'm assuming, like, I think what you're saying here is that actually once you've got that base and you understand yourself and you understand what's normal for you from a training perspective, then it's a really good thing to look at and kind of factor in. Yeah. And it's just another one to your list, isn't it, really? It's like if I went in and I couldn't hit a deadlift, I would look at, okay, did I sleep well the night before? Is my nutrition on point? Have I been overly stressed? And maybe make a judgment on that. This is another thing to add to that list and to take into consideration.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like people who aren't trained, for example, or like are new to the gym, they might be having these ebbs and flows, but like you said, it could be due to various factors. They might be doing too much too soon. They might have literally just been absolutely knackered because they just are not used to the right intensity of where we're at the moment. But for those people who have monitored almost those ebbs and flows and they know it's always at this point, it just gives them, like I said, that extra education for themselves on top. And you can try and counteract it a little bit, or you can just try and plan your training a little bit more around it so that you're hitting the right intensity levels. And it's not saying during the luteal phase you need to strip everything back, because some people say that online. They're like, right, okay, do Pilates during your luteal phase, but do strength training during your follicular stage. You don't need to go in and out of training cycles and like different training like exercises, but it's just being aware of things and maybe making adaptations in terms of rep schemes or sets or things like that, just in case people are getting like really fatigued and low energy.
Perfect. So if we look at this as like, we'll try and, I think this is a great starting point because what it kind of does is it introduces the topic. It gives you some broad recommendations about what to look for and what to expect. And then, like I said, I think what will probably be easier is if we go from here with a bit of a Q&A. So we introduce the topic and then we can get really specific about any advice that any specific clients want. But if we had to sort of like boil this down to a few recommendations from here, again, I'll try and summarize what I think you've said and then you can correct me if I'm wrong in any way. So in my head, it's kind of like, make sure you train first, make sure you have a good foundation in place, and that's the most important thing. And then from there, a little bit of tracking throughout your cycle and understanding, okay, where did I feel weak? Where did I feel strong? Where did I feel meh, like halfway house? That again is a really good data point that you can use with your coach or you can use to monitor yourself. And then from there, you can make a few decisions around training volume, nutrition, and all those things as well. Is there anything that you sort of add to that or you'd correct there?
I think that's pretty much all I would say. I think the only other thing to sort of mention is birth control. So that will have an impact on it as well. Because obviously the menstrual cycle that I'm talking about is very much like not influenced by hormones. This is like a normal menstrual cycle where you're not on any birth control. If you're on certain birth controls, this is where it can impact it. It's very much depends on whether you're on an estrogen based one and on your progesterone based one. That's when everything can vary. But it's just making sure that when you are tracking your sort of ebbs and flows, you know roughly what weeks are at certain levels. So it's like most people are on birth control, like pill packets, they will have a bleed every 4 weeks. So they'll know in terms of, right, okay, where I am week by week, but some people won't have any bleeding at all, and that's harder to track.
Okay.
So it's not always a easy thing to go, right, okay, I'm on week 4, I need to do this. So it's a little bit more, it's harder when you're influenced by other hormones. But yeah, that's probably the only other thing I would add. And I don't really have much information on that topic, but that's the only other thing just to sort of take into consideration that it might be influenced by.
I think that's great as well because it's kind of, I suppose that's something that we could, again, if any clients are sort of looking at that and have that particular sort of like question for G or like sort of thinking, okay, I'm experiencing that issue and I don't know how to handle it. It's something we could maybe go away and sort of come up with a few recommendations based on some of the research around that as well, isn't it? And provide that in the next episode. So yeah, I think that was perfect starting point, G. I think the main thing I would say here as well is it's a topic that is to be discussed here. I think that's like a big thing from a coaching perspective. And I think with yourself, G, it's like, we know this is something that affects performance and therefore like in the same way we discuss anything else, we should discuss this, shouldn't we? So if you are having any issues or concerns around this topic, you've obviously got the coaching team and you've got G if you're more comfortable speaking to G directly, we can obviously direct you towards her. But I will post this video, I'll leave it open for any Q&As. If you want to send any private messages as well to myself, G, or any of the rest of the team, just with your questions as well, let us know. And we'll do a couple of episodes on this because I think it's really interesting, one from a CPD perspective for me, and I hope it's really valuable for you guys as clients. So thank you, G. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.